Some players are respected, some are admired, and then there are the rare few who make grown men, 300 pounds of muscle and armor, feel something closer to dread every single time they have to walk up to the line of scrimmage. For 15 straight seasons, that was Jim Otto. Before he ever became a Hall of Famer, before Mr. Raider became his permanent nickname, Jim Otto was simply the man nobody in the American Football League wanted to face twice in one game. His nose was broken more than 20 times and eventually curved like the letter S. He wore a helmet a full size larger than anyone else on his own team, and by the time his career ended, that helmet had absorbed so many collisions that the paint had been scraped clean off it. Opposing linemen described looking through his face mask the way you'd describe looking at a gargoyle. And when he bled, which was often, he didn't want anyone near him to stop it, because he believed the sight of his own blood dripping down his face made the man across from him just a little more afraid to hit him again. This is the story of the most feared Raider in NFL history. This is Jim Otto. And by the time his career was finished, his body had paid a bill that most human beings could never survive. James Edwin Otto was born on January 5, 1938, in Wausau, Wisconsin, to parents Lorenz and Loretta Otto, who worked whatever jobs they could find just to keep the family afloat. Money was so tight during Otto's childhood that, for a stretch, his family lived in a converted chicken coop, and there were winters when his parents couldn't even afford new shoes to keep his feet dry. It was not exactly the beginning you'd expect for a future Hall of Famer, but it built something in him early, a willingness to absorb hardship without complaint that would define the rest of his life. Otto started at center and linebacker at Wausau High School, then went on to play both positions at the University of Miami in Florida. Football didn't come easily to him at first. As a skinny junior high kid, he was so undersized that his own coach wouldn't even let him off the bench. It took years of relentless off-season work before he was strong enough to start, first as a backup behind his own cousin, then as a varsity regular, then eventually as an all-state selection at both center and, in hockey season, goaltender. He was a good college player, but by NFL standards of the era, he simply didn't look the part. Coming out of college, Otto stood 6'2" and weighed only 205 pounds, a frame scouts considered dangerously small for the trenches. Not a single NFL team drafted him in 1959. To the league that actually existed at the time, Jim Otto simply wasn't big enough to survive. But 1960 brought something new: the American Football League, a brand new, scrappy alternative league desperate for players willing to prove themselves. The Oakland Raiders, one of the AFL's original 8 franchises, signed Otto as an undrafted free agent. He later said the new league needed bodies, and he happened to be one. Nobody, including Otto himself, could have predicted that the undersized reject the NFL didn't want would go on to become the single most feared man at his position professional football had ever produced. The Raiders' first season in 1960 was rough by any measure. Oakland didn't even have a permanent stadium yet, splitting home games between Kezar Stadium and Candlestick Park across the bay in San Francisco. The team finished 6-8, an unremarkable debut for a league most experts assumed wouldn't survive its first few years. Otto started at center from the very first game in franchise history, and he never gave the job back. The following year, 1961, was worse. The Raiders collapsed to 2-12. Then came 1962, arguably the darkest season in franchise history, a 1-13 finish, dead last in the entire league, part of a brutal 19-game losing streak that stretched across those 2 seasons. Coaches came and went. Rosters got gutted and rebuilt. Attendance was embarrassingly low. Through all of it, one man never left the field: Jim Otto. And the football he was playing in those years bore almost no resemblance to the sport as it exists today. The AFL of the early 1960s was raw, violent, and barely policed. Defensive linemen clawed at face masks, threw late hits, and swung fists with almost no fear of a penalty flag. Otto absorbed all of it. He lost nearly all of his own teeth to the punishment. His nose was broken again and again until it no longer looked like it belonged on a human face. He'd walk off the field bloodied, his ribs wrapped tight in tape just to hold his body together, then trot right back out for the next series like nothing had happened. He wasn't the biggest man on the field. He rarely was, at any point in his career. But he made sure that size stopped mattering, because no one who lined up across from Jim Otto in those years walked away from the experience unmarked. Everything changed in 1963. Team management hired a 33-year-old assistant coach away from the San Diego Chargers named Al Davis, making him, at the time, the youngest head coach and general manager in the history of professional football. Davis repainted the franchise in silver and black, installed an aggressive, deep-throwing offensive system he called the vertical game, and set out to build a team that other franchises would genuinely dread playing. He found the perfect foundation already standing in the middle of his offensive line. Under Davis, Oakland's record flipped almost overnight, from 1-13 the year before to 10-4, the franchise's first winning season, and Davis was named the AFL's Coach of the Year. Otto was one of 6 Raiders named to the All-AFL team that season. It was the beginning of the identity Al Davis wanted for his franchise, and Otto, quite literally, was the man in the middle of it. Years later, reflecting on those early Oakland teams, Otto put it simply: there was some intimidation. Teams genuinely did not want to travel to Oakland, not because of the scoreboard, but because of what was waiting for them once they got there. And nothing waiting for them was more unsettling than the man wearing 00 at the center of that offensive line. By now, Otto had built himself into a very different physical specimen than the 205-pound college kid nobody wanted. He'd bulked up to a playing weight of around 255 pounds through relentless off-season training, but the real transformation wasn't measured in pounds. It was on his face. His nose, broken more than 20 times over the course of his career, had bent into a permanent, unmistakable curve. He wore a size 8 helmet, the largest on the entire Raiders roster, and by the later years of his career, its surface was scarred and scraped from thousands of violent collisions with some of the most feared defensive linemen of the era, players like Curly Culp, Ernie Ladd, Buck Buchanan, Merlin Olsen, and Pittsburgh's Mean Joe Green. One opponent said that looking through Otto's face mask felt like staring at a gargoyle, and Otto leaned into that reputation rather than hiding from it. When a screw inside his own helmet once tore open his forehead during a game, blood pouring down over the bridge of his broken nose, a trainer rushed over to try to stop the bleeding. Otto growled at him to get away. A teammate on the sideline realized exactly what was happening. Otto believed the blood running down his face made him look even more terrifying to the man he was about to line up against on the very next snap. Joe Green, one of the most ferocious defensive tackles to ever play the game, spent 6 seasons battling Otto across the line of scrimmage, and even he admitted the collisions took a toll. "You hit him in the head and your helmet would just ring," Green said. "Before you could even think about delivering a hit on Jim Otto," Green explained, "you had to get your own mind right first. That is not something opposing legends say about ordinary football players. That is what they say about a man they were genuinely afraid to hit." Otto never pretended the violence bothered him. Playing football, he said later in life, was always a serious proposition, and he wanted to put the man across from him flat on his back and go home smiling. Even legendary opponents like Green Bay's Ray Nitschke, one of the hardest hitters of the era, got the same treatment. Otto wanted to hit him first. Bill Walsh, an offensive assistant on the Raiders coaching staff in the mid-1960s before he went on to become a Hall of Fame head coach himself, marveled for years afterward at Otto's technique, saying nobody else could quite replicate it, and that Otto played every single down with real intensity. That kind of respect, from a man who would go on to coach some of the greatest offenses in NFL history, tells you exactly how far Otto's reputation had already traveled by the mid-1960s. By 1967, the Raiders were no longer a punchline. They were a genuine problem for the rest of the American Football League. With new quarterback Darryl LaMonica, nicknamed the Mad Bomber, slinging the ball deep on nearly every down, Oakland's offense terrorized opposing defenses all season long. The Raiders finished 13-1, the best record in the AFL, and led the entire league in scoring with 468 points, an average of better than 33 points a game. Behind that explosive offense stood Otto, and this was arguably the most punishing season of his career. His nose was broken yet again. His ribs were constantly bruised and taped. At one point that year, he cracked his ribs so severely that he had to wrap his own torso in layer after layer of tape just to breathe properly on the sideline. On top of that, he developed double pneumonia during the season and was reportedly coughing up blood between plays. He did not miss a single game. In December of 1967, Oakland dismantled the Houston Oilers 40-7 to win the AFL championship, sending the Raiders to Super Bowl II against Vince Lombardi's Green Bay Packers. Otto battled through that game exactly like he battled through every other one. But Green Bay was simply the better team that day, and the Packers won 33-14. It remains, to this day, the only Super Bowl appearance of Jim Otto's entire career. Despite the loss, 1967 cemented something important. Around the league, opposing coaches and players had stopped seeing Otto as merely a durable, undersized overachiever. He was, by now, widely regarded as the single most feared interior lineman in professional football, a man who would play through pneumonia, cracked ribs, and a face that barely resembled itself, and never once asked out of the game. Otto's excellence never wavered, even as the Raiders kept coming up just short of a championship. He became the only player in AFL history to be named an All-Star in every single season of the league's 10-year existence, a run of 10 consecutive All-AFL selections that no other player at any position could match. In 1968, Oakland again led the league in scoring, beat Kansas City in a tense divisional tiebreaker, and then lost the AFL championship to the New York Jets, 27-23, a Jets team that went on to win Super Bowl III. In 1969, the Raiders reached the AFL championship game once more, only to fall to the Kansas City Chiefs, 17-7, a Chiefs team that would go on to win the Super Bowl that year too. It was a pattern that would define much of Otto's career: relentless individual dominance, deep playoff runs, and, again, a title that stayed just out of reach. Through it all, his consecutive game streak kept climbing, even as his body kept absorbing more and more damage. Then, in 1970, the American Football League and the National Football League officially merged, and a new question hung over every AFL veteran. Could they actually hang with the NFL's established, hard-nosed talent? For Jim Otto, that question was answered almost immediately. That same year, he played through a shattered jaw that had to be wired shut, unable to eat solid food or speak normally, and still made every line call and every snap for the Raiders. He was named to the Pro Bowl in his very first season in the merged NFL. Instant proof that he wasn't just an AFL-era relic. He belonged among the very best centers the sport had ever produced, in any league. Kansas City's Hall of Fame linebacker Bobby Bell, who battled Otto more than almost anyone else in the league, called him the best center he had ever lined up against. Around the AFL and the early merged NFL, opposing scouting reports carried a simple, blunt warning about Oakland's offensive line. Stay as far away from the 0-0 man as you possibly could. By the early 1970s, Jim Otto had earned a nickname that would follow him for the rest of his life: Mr. Raider. It wasn't a marketing invention, it was simply the truth. Otto insisted on holding the game ball in every single Raiders team photograph, from 1960 all the way through 1974, a small, stubborn ritual reminding every young teammate that the center's hands were where the offense began. But underneath the nickname and the reputation, his body was quietly falling apart. He had already endured more than a dozen major surgeries by this point in his career. His knees had been cut open and repaired so many times that simply standing up from a chair had become painful. His shoulders were held together as much by scar tissue as by anything resembling healthy joints. And yet, on Sundays, teammates said watching Otto walk onto the field was like watching a man flip a switch. In December of 1972, Otto found himself at the center of one of the most controversial plays in NFL history, the Immaculate Reception game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Otto had a clear view of the disputed catch that ultimately went in Pittsburgh's favor, and he always maintained the pass should have been ruled incomplete under the rules of the time. He also later admitted something surprising for a man known across the league for being utterly fearless. During the 15-minute delay while officials sorted out the call, Otto genuinely feared for his own safety from the intoxicated, jubilant Steelers crowd, and quietly plotted an escape route out of the stadium, in case the ruling went against Pittsburgh and the situation turned ugly. Oakland lost that game 13-7. It was one of the rare moments in Jim Otto's career when the fear ran in the other direction. Otto played on through 1973 and 1974, still the unquestioned anchor of Oakland's offensive line even as his body neared its absolute limit. The Raiders lost the 1973 AFC Championship to the undefeated Miami Dolphins, 27-10, then lost again in the 1974 AFC Championship, this time to the Pittsburgh Steelers, 24-13, in a game defined by a legendary matchup at the line of scrimmage between Otto and Pittsburgh's Mean Joe Green, two future Hall of Famers colliding snap after snap. It marked Otto's 223rd consecutive start once you count the postseason alongside the regular season, and it turned out to be his last game in the NFL. After 15 seasons, 210 consecutive regular season starts, and 308 total games played once you include the preseason and playoffs, Jim Otto retired following the 1974 season. He had never missed a single game due to injury, not one. In an era of professional football with almost no rules protecting the men in the trenches, that streak stands as one of the most remarkable feats of pure durability the sport has ever recorded, at any position, in any decade. The bill for all of that durability came due after football, and it was staggering. By his own count, Jim Otto underwent 74 surgeries over the course of his lifetime, the overwhelming majority of them repairing damage his football career had inflicted on his body. 28 of those operations were on his knees alone. Both knees and both shoulders were eventually replaced with artificial joints. His spine and neck required multiple operations, including spinal fusions where vertebrae were literally bolted together. He suffered more than 20 documented concussions during an era when the league barely acknowledged concussions existed, and he later admitted there were games when he'd walk off the field seeing double, or moments when he genuinely didn't recognize his own wife standing in front of him. Reflecting on it decades later in a PBS Frontline interview, Otto said simply, "I went to war and came out of the battle with what I got." After football, the damage kept compounding. He survived 3 separate life-threatening infections tied to his artificial joints. At one point, he went 6 full months without a functioning right knee joint while doctors fought to clear an infection before they could implant another replacement. Finally, on August 1, 2007, that same right leg was amputated above the knee. He also battled prostate cancer later in life. And through every bit of it, Otto refused to frame any of it as a tragedy. "Pain is a state of mind," he once told the Sacramento Bee. He explained that if his nose wasn't broken by the end of a game, he genuinely wondered whether he'd played hard enough. When the final accounting was done, Jim Otto's resume read like nothing else at his position, before or since. He was named a first-team All-Pro 10 times over his career, 9 times in the AFL and once in the merged NFL, making him the first player in the history of professional football to reach 10 first-team All-Pro selections at any position. In the decades since, exactly one other player has ever matched that number: Jerry Rice. Otto was named All-League for 12 consecutive seasons, made 12 All-Star and Pro Bowl appearances, and remains the only center in the AFL's entire 10-year history to earn All-League recognition. In 1969, he was named to the AFL's official all-time team. 50 years later, in 2019, he was named to the NFL's 100th anniversary all-time team, one of only 4 centers in the league's first 100 years to receive that honor. In 1980, Jim Otto was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in his very first year of eligibility, becoming just the 3rd AFL player ever enshrined in Canton. At that induction ceremony, Raiders owner Al Davis, the man who had built his entire franchise's identity around fear and intimidation, said Otto had been, for more than a decade, the standard of excellence by which centers were judged. His old head coach John Madden put it even more simply years later, describing a player who refused to ever come out of practice, let alone a game, because, as Madden said, he wasn't going to give up his spot. Jim Otto died on May 19, 2024, at the age of 86, in Auburn, California, having outlived his own playing career by exactly 50 years. He'd lost a leg, both knees, both shoulders, and pieces of his own spine to the game he loved, and by his own account, he never once regretted a single snap of it. He married, raised a family, ran a small business empire of Burger King franchises and real estate around Sacramento, and remained, until the very end, the face of the franchise he helped build from nothing. There have been tougher players, there have been more talented players, but across 15 seasons in the AFL and NFL, nobody made opposing rosters dread a football game quite like Jim Otto did. He wasn't just the original Raider. He was the reason the rest of the league learned to fear what that silver and black jersey actually meant. If you want more legendary Raiders, NFL stories like this one, click the video right on your screen and make sure you're subscribed so you never miss the next one.